Well, good morning, everyone, and we'd like to welcome you to the May 20th edition of Farm Office Live. Welcome you to on a where I sit, a stormy day here in East Central Ohio. So glad that many of you, well, not glad that it's raining, but glad that it is raining at this time, so some folks can jump on to listen today. We appreciate everybody logging in. I'd like to welcome each of you here and introduce our teaching team for today's program. First, I guess, Diane, kind of a sad, bittersweet day for the Farm Office team because this will be Diane's last official Farm Office Live as a OSU Extension employee. But hopefully, when she comes back, she can come back as an emeritus faculty member, come back and share her thoughts with us as she goes into retirement later this summer. So Diane Shoemaker, our OSU Extension Field Specialist, Dairy Production Economics. Barry Ward, the director of the OSU Income Tax School and leader for the Production Business Management Program. Peggy Hall, the director of the OSU Ag and Resource Law Program. Yours truly, David Marcy, extension educator over in Coshocton County. We have Robert Moore, attorney in the OSU Ag and Resource Law Program. And back by popular demand, Margaret Jadlotsky is here. Margaret, you were here in November, and I think we brought for a labor update, so we brought you back today. And spinning all the things behind the scenes, Jeff Lewis is making sure that we're getting some things dropped in the Q&A in the chat box. So we appreciate Jeff doing all that behind the scenes. Just a reminder that the slides and recording for today's presentation will be found and can be found at go.osu.edu/farm office live. That's in the chat box. You can go there and grab the slides, download those to your computer for your use. And then again, if you want to watch a recording of today's presentation or share that with your friends or colleagues, you're more than welcome to do that at that go.osu.edu/farm office live website. Questions, we will use the chat box to keep dropping links to you so you can access those links as we go through today's program, and Jeff will be managing that. If you have questions, specific questions about today's content and want to ask those, don't hesitate to drop those in the Q&A feature at any time during the program, and we will either answer them live or behind the scenes, we'll get you some of our responses to you. And then if you later this weekend or next week, you think that of a question that you would have liked to ask and didn't get the chance to do it, don't hesitate to drop it to any of the folks on here today, or you can drop it to myself and I'll share it with the team. So we just appreciate those questions as they come in during the program. And we are doing an evaluation. Now, today's evaluation will be a little bit different than what you've seen in our previous iterations of the Farm Office Live. This evaluation will be a comprehensive evaluation of the programs that we've held here in 2022. We're just looking for your quick feedback on the programs and the topics that you like the most, as well as get your ideas on some topics that we can add into our program as we move into our fall program series. This will be our last program for the spring series. And as long as nothing earth-shattering happens between now and Farm Science Review, we're going to take our summer break just like we did last year and come back with our first Farm Office Live from the Farm Science Review in London, Ohio in September. But we're looking for your responses of how we're doing here on Farm Office Live. That link will be shared at the end of today's program. And then we also will send it directly to your email box so you have a chance to give us your opinion. Today's program is as follows. First, we're going to, always the most popular topic, input costs. And I don't know if it's popular. I don't know if people like to talk about it, Barry. But Barry can talk about input costs and crop profitability. And Margaret is here to give us the summer Ohio farm labor update. And then Peggy Hall is going to give us a look at the Ohio General Assembly website, which we didn't get to last month, as well as a legislative update. Long-term care, we had a lot of positive comments on the long-term care discussion that we had last month. And Robert is back for version 2 of that. I'm going to give a quick federal farm program update on some things that are out there, programs that are open for all of us to participate in. And capstoning us today, and Diane, right on cue, the dog loves us. Capstoning today is Diane is going to talk about her farm management tips from her career with us at OSU Extension. So with that, Barry, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it.
All right. Thanks, David. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. We're happy to have you with us. And I think perhaps you really overstated the popularity of my section. I think probably the last few months, it's maybe been the least popular as we've talked about higher input costs. And we're going to start out doing that again today. We're going to talk a bit about fertilizer as we kind of move towards looking at kind of the overall picture for 22 for the rest of this season, and also kind of a first look into 23 as we evaluate how these input costs might affect us and what these crop prices are looking like on out into 23. One of the things that we did, we just finished up our final versions of our crop budgets and posted those for the 22 season. And as we've gone through the last couple of months, most of the focus has been on fertilizer. However, crop protection chemicals, one thing that I'm not going to focus on too much today, have been also a source of a little bit of irritation for farmers as they're shopping and trying to find the best bargains. And what we found as we looked at all the price sheets and the cost structure from the various folks that we do source data from is that there's a wide difference between some products. Some products essentially seeing very little to no change in price from last year, and some 200 to 300% increases. And I know, especially for the farmers that are on here today, perhaps you've seen those firsthand and have had to deal with those. But for others, it's maybe a little bit of news to just think about the discrepancies. And I know, speaking with Mark Laux, our weed scientist here in the college, he's indicated the same thing, that he's seen differences in price increases of these various products. And it's a very mature industry. Many of these products are at least available in a generic form. So at least we have hopefully some positive news going into 23 as some of these supply chain issues continue to work themselves out. And some of these generics that we've seen over the last 20 years that have been a real benefit to us continue to move back in at a higher supply into the marketplace to alleviate some of those cost concerns, at least on the crop protection chemicals. It's not going to be something perhaps we see in the next couple of months, but over the next couple of years, hopefully we'll have some relief in that area. Okay, so let's move into fertilizer. This is the one that gets all the press, and really it's one of the biggest difficulties as crop producers these days try to navigate these higher costs. The first bullet that I have here, and one that we've talked about extensively over the last year, is this higher demand in the fertilizer sector, primarily due to higher crop prices. And we showed the correlation between those two also. So as long as we see these high crop prices, we're very, very likely not going to see any relief in global fertilizer prices. And at the same time, we've talked about some of the supply side issues, and COVID being one of the primary things that we've had to deal with over the last 2 years, and some of the labor shortages and those affecting fertilizer production. Shipping issues continue to be a problem, both from a labor standpoint and also looking at the energy costs associated with those shipping issues. The one that I have bolded here at the bottom, these high natural gas prices, we're going to come back to that here towards the end of this discussion. But this has been a real problem, in the high natural gas prices and availability issues in Europe, really impacting nitrogen production, and also in some ways creating a floor in nitrogen prices globally. Okay, we've talked about these issues, a number of things impacting trade, and that impacted fertilizer prices as well. I'm not going to go through each of these, but of course the war in Ukraine and what's going on there, and some of the supply suspensions, both from China and from Russia, impacting the global supply chain, causing prices to increase in most situations for most products. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about nitrogen fertilizers and some of the trade related issues specific to the US, and these are some of the duties, some of the extra duties that we now have in place, and possibly will have more coming. But the Department of Commerce, they made their affirmative preliminary countervailing duty determination this last fall on a couple of different countries and several different companies within those countries. And you can see the subsidy rates or the duty rates here on the right-hand side. Really, the Russian duties maybe not as impactful as what we initially thought, simply due to the fact that there is very little to no trade happening from Russia to the US and in the way of fertilizer right now. So these subsidy rates and duties, if you will, won't be as impactful. But Trinidad and Tobago, there are some duties due to the countervailing rulings. And also there's a potential second ruling coming, an anti-dumping case on these same products from these same countries. So we may have some additional tax due on trade coming in from Trinidad and Tobago. And we do actually source quite a lot of nitrogen fertilizer from that country. So this may create a little bit more upward pressure on nitrogen prices as we move into the summer, depending on what the Department of Commerce decides on this particular second case on UAN, or liquid nitrogen fertilizers. I mentioned natural gas prices, and this is just a comparison between the average US natural gas price priced at on a per million BTUs, US dollars per million BTUs. And you can see the blue line, this is the European price. And since 20, it's seen substantial increases in this price. A lot of our nitrogen fertilizer, well, all of our nitrogen fertilizer relies on natural gas in some way, and then also our phosphate fertilizers as well. So this is an important component. And even though we showed in previous sessions in this particular webinar series that nitrogen fertilizers aren't highly correlated with natural gas prices any longer, this is an exception. When we do see these higher natural gas prices to this level, it will and has impacted nitrogen prices in the production facilities coming out of Europe. So those are important. And with that, that also creates a sort of a floor with natural gas prices globally, and especially in Europe, and also nitrogen prices. So I think going forward, until we start to see some relief, and part of this is just based on supply and demand and structural issues. Some of this also is related to the ongoing war and some of the supply issues coming out of Russia. So we'll also touch on this towards the end as well. We've talked about these as well, some strategies to somewhat mitigate these cost concerns on fertilizer, making sure that we're being smart with our applications, making sure that we're soil testing, looking at the return to nitrogen, and this corn nitrogen rate calculator will help with that. Looking at all possible sources, fertilizer storage going forward might allow you to source and purchase and take delivery of fertilizer in some of those years where we do see some relief, and in particular, those down periods, and historically we've seen those in kind of that summer period, late summer, after we do get done with side dress applications. And then another thing that we've talked also about is combining grain sales with fertilizer purchases, of just essentially a hedge. If we are going to be buying fertilizer at these high prices, it might be a good idea to go ahead and lock in those grain sales along with that. Here's our projection right now for 22. As we look at the three primary crops, commodity crops here in Ohio, plugging in $7 fall delivery for corn, $14.70 soybeans, $11.65 wheat, and that's actually a little bit lower than it was coming out of the weekend this past. And you can see the returns substantial and higher than last year, even in spite of these higher input costs, these higher commodity costs. And just was looking back just before I came on, and what we had plugged in May of 2021 for the 21 season, was $5 corn, and we're plugging in $7 corn this year, a big jump. And for soybeans, we plugged in 13 and a quarter in 21, and now we see where we are now. Wheat, this is the biggest change. We had plugged in $6.30 in the spring of 2021 compared to what we plugged in now at $11.65. So substantial increases in those profitability or the prices, and also the profitability outlooks for these three crops. Now, a lot can change between now and the end of this growing season, and we may see some of these relationships in cost and price change. Looking forward into 23, and I know we started to get a lot of questions, especially as far as timing of fertilizer purchases and some of those things. You know, while we don't expect to see drastic increases in fertilizer costs, thinking that we're maybe nearing the top, although energy costs will somewhat dictate that. If we do see drastic run-ups from where we are, we may continue to see fertilizer prices float higher, but we do expect to see prices perhaps very little, but some softening into that summer fill period, not offering much opportunity in most of the major fertilizer components, but at least offering a slight decrease as we get into that late July, August, September window. You can see, however, you know, we're plugging in the same cost structure. Prices, however, for those futures contracts into 23, December 23 corn contract will give us a net of about 6 1/4 for corn for the 23 fall crop delivery period. You can see the returns do decrease a little bit from where we are looking forward into 22, but there's a long way to go to get there. But that's just kind of our first look right now at 23 and the profit potential. So what's next? A lot of things can happen, but this is kind of as we start to piece together a first look at kind of going into 23. Input prices, costs that may decline with lower COVID-related supply constraints. As I mentioned earlier, crop protection chemicals, perhaps. Input prices and costs that will likely increase in 23, seed, interest expense, machinery and equipment, labor, land rent, all of these, I think, well, I'm not going to guarantee increases, but it's likely that we're going to see increases. Input prices, costs that will, as you would expect, move along with the price of oil, energy costs, drying, hauling, fuel, oil, and grease, input price costs that will likely be impacted by both crop prices and energy prices and fertilizer. So that's one that I know gets a lot of our focus, but we'll continue to follow that as we go through the summer. And please contact me if you have any questions. I'll do my best. Okay, so I think that brings me to the end. I'll just offer one more opportunity for those of you who have custom rate work. If you're doing custom rate farm work, or if you're hiring it done, we would certainly like your data for our survey. So I believe I'm going to turn it over next to Margaret. We're happy to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Barry. It's great to be here and great to see you all again. I really enjoyed my time last time, so I'm happy to get into it now. Oh, did we lose share screen?
Yes, you did, Margaret.
I hope that wasn't me.
No, I stopped sharing. I'm waiting. I was going to turn it over to you.
Oh, I see. Okay. I'm not. Oh, shoot. Do you mind sharing again? And I can just tell you when to advance. The slides are not coming up. I'm not able to share my screen. Or I'm not seeing the option to click my slides to share the screen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can share those for you, Margaret.
Thanks, David.
I have the technology. Just 1 second as I get to the right slide. Sorry, people, for the delay.
Oh, PowerPoint's updating. Oh. This always
It always
happens.
does that when you're there. You go. You should be able
All
to see
right.
it now.
Thanks, David. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, everyone. So yeah, very happy to be here, and kind of like jumping right off from what Barry was talking about in terms of input costs. Labor is, of course, one of our most important inputs, no matter where you are in the agricultural value chain. And we're seeing those sorts of costs increase as well, particularly around wages. So just what I'm going to do today is give a couple quick updates on where we're seeing wage rates in different levels, different sectors of the supply chain, and also give a look at the unemployment rate and talk about why we're still seeing a lot of trouble finding workers, even if the unemployment rate looks quite low. So if you want to go ahead and click to the next slide. Thanks. So the first slide first information that I'm going to present here is the sector level wages in Ohio. So we're looking at two different sectors, and if you want to click, we'll see thank you, David. We're going to see two important sectors here. One is manufacturing and the other is leisure and hospitality. So we use manufacturing as a sort of next best option from people moving from these maybe food service jobs. We see the option of working in a manufacturing is often quite or more significantly remunerative for them. And we saw a little bit of disruption in that sector from COVID, quite a sharp decrease. We see that in both sectors. And then we saw the manufacturing was able to kind of pick that trend right back up. But what we're seeing more recently in the start of 2022 and heading into the summer is a decline in the wage rate pretty significantly. And all indications actually show that this is actually going to head down, kind of returning to the sort of pre-COVID level. We saw a lot of incentives to return to work in these sectors, but now it seems that we're going to start, everyone talks about the new normal, but it seems like what we're going to be seeing here in manufacturing at least is the old normal of a wage rate of just about $27.20. And so we're heading in that direction, and all of the indications seem to say that that's sort of where we're heading. And then once the wage rate is there and evening out, it'll start to sort of pick back up again slowly at the same level it was before. The story is a little bit different in food service sector. We see no indication that the trends we're seeing in higher wages there are going to turn back down. And particularly as we head into summer, when demand for these positions is incredibly high. Think about those concession stands at your amusement parks and your local swimming pools. Those demand for these jobs stays really high, and in order to attract workers, which this industry in particular has struggled with quite a bit, we're going to see no sort of downturn. And if anything, this new level of above $17 per hour is actually going to, it seems to be, this average is going to be sticking around. And so as we see, there was that same decline from COVID and then a sharp pickup. And now this seems to be where the new base is going to be starting, quite significantly higher than where we were prior to the start of the pandemic. So almost $2 per hour more in terms of the sort of baseline expected wage in the leisure industry. Of course, that is an average. So in some places you're going to be making more, and this is of course across the whole state. So you can imagine there's going to be significant rural urban differences there, but overall the average wage in this sector has seen sort of complete level change. So we can jump ahead and look at farm level wages now. So breaking up the farm wage by job type, we see a sort of interesting trend, particularly for ag equipment operators, quite a sharp trend change from where we had been sort of moderately increasing the wage for ag equipment operators. These are, of course, our most skilled farm workers. Wages have been increasing somewhat, relatively more flat. And then after the labor shock of 2020, that's really picked up, and the wage is increasing much more dramatically now, heading rapidly towards $22 an hour as an average wage for an equipment operator in Ohio. Sort of a different story for farm crop workers and livestock workers in particular, are the only sort of industry or subsector we've examined where there's been a decline in the wage. And so they are really, they had been trending above the crop workers for some time. And then as 2020 hit, we saw a significant decrease to the point now where they are actually significantly below the wage for crop workers. It doesn't look like much, but it is actually a significant difference there. They'd been equal in about 2020, and then now heading in a different direction. And of course, this is only going to exacerbate difficulties livestock operations have had in finding workers, as the wage is starting to become a little more compressed likely as options get better in the other two sectors. That's where we're looking at for farm wages. But as Barry said, this idea of increasing input costs, labor is certainly not immune, and this graph shows it. You're paying more for your crop workers as well as your equipment operators, but particularly for those equipment operators, they're really receiving much more compensation than they had in the past. This kind of jump in only 1 year, it's sort of kind of a big trend shift. So we can jump to the next slide. And to some extent, and this is true across the supply chain, this wage growth is reflecting the scarcity of labor. So obviously when it's hard to find people, one of the quickest ways to change that is, of course, to increase the amount you're paying them. Of course, that's not always the option for every operation. But what this graph shows is the number of workers in each of these three sectors. Obviously, equipment operators, these sort of highly trained people who are able to operate machinery, they are the lowest number. We have always been seeing the lowest number of those workers in Ohio as long as we've had this data. We see from 2018 to 2020, there was really no move in the number, basically a flat line right around 500. But with that sharp increase in the wage, we are actually seeing now a slight uptick in the number of workers, showing that people are responding to these wage increases, and you are able to pull them from different jobs as the wage increases. Of course, again, not always an option for everyone. Livestock workers actually pretty much flatlined since 2017, and actually going down a little bit as well. And then crop workers, a little bit more of a variability here, but as you can see, we saw the wage increase into the most recent set of data, and we are seeing response in the number of workers as well. And so this idea that this wages are changing in response to scarcity is a straightforward one, but it is nice to see that it bears out in the data to a good extent. So we're seeing that both on farm, and then on the next slide, if you could, yeah, we're seeing it in farther down the supply chain as well. So this is, I think I've shown a version of this graph. It's getting updated constantly, which I always enjoy seeing. But we obviously, this is food service workers in Ohio. We saw this dramatic decrease during COVID, and now we're bouncing around this new normal as quite a different level of the number of workers that we had been seeing prior to the pandemic. So prior to the pandemic, we'd been bouncing around 450,000 for about 2 years, maybe 2 to 3 years prior to the pandemic. And now it seems to be that we're seeing the same pattern of within year variation repeating, but at a level of workforce level that's about 40,000 fewer workers. So bouncing around maybe 420,000 or 410,000 for a really dramatic difference. And this is really where we're seeing some of the continual problems with labor scarcity are happening in these sort of low wage jobs. People are seeing better opportunities in other sectors and responding to that very well. And so we're seeing I don't imagine without significant intervention or huge wage increases, it's unlikely that we're going to ever return to this level rapidly. I mean, obviously, as we saw here, we're going to grow over time and slowly build back to where we were. But for now, it seems like we're sort of back in this lower level of labor. you go ahead and click to the next slide. The other thing that we like to always look at and keep an eye on is the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is actually quite low now. It's pretty much to its pre-pandemic level. We had a bottomed out in the unemployment rate a few years prior to the start of the a few months prior to the start of the pandemic in October 2019. And right now we're sitting at just about 3.4%. And so really functionally, essentially the same as where we were prior to the start of the pandemic. So what this tells us is that people have returned to work, but the sector distribution of where they've gone is quite different. When we look at the national rate and compare with Ohio on the next slide, thanks, David, we see that Ohio is actually doing a little bit worse than the national average. The national unemployment rate is quite a bit lower. Again, what this tells us is that not only are people returning to work in different sectors, we also have seen significant labor market exits, which I believe is on the next slide. Yeah, so labor market exits, so people who are no longer in the workforce, either this is people who have retired, like our dear Diane, but also people who have left the labor market for other reasons. Maybe they're moving from a double family income to a single family income. Regardless, we saw this increase dramatically throughout the labor market, throughout the pandemic. And then it's leveled off somewhat, but you can see where we had been before in terms of people who are not in the labor market. We are now at a significant level above that. So it's not just that people have returned to work in different sectors, it's that there are a significant number of people who have not returned to work at all and do not plan to return to the labor market at all. And so either they are, as I said, retired, or they're simply not working for a wage. And so that is going to continue, I think, to be an issue, particularly as childcare costs remain high. I think that's keeping prime age people away from the workforce in particular, as well as maybe incentives towards retirement is pushing people out a little bit earlier than maybe they would have in the past. Both of these things are working to keep the number of labor market exits extremely high, which is although it seems like our unemployment rate is really low, people are still struggling to find work, particularly in those sort of prime age employment areas. So if we want to jump to the next slide, some issues on the horizon is that's where I'm going to end talking about. You want to click to the next slide. The idea of this idea that we're in a post-pandemic world, we are not in the same crisis mode we were in 2021, where the number of people returning to work was really quite low and unemployment was still remaining very high. We're no longer in that crisis period. So the gulf, that extreme gulf between labor demand and labor supply that we had been seeing, and that sort of characterized the immediate post-pandemic recovery period, we're seeing a lot of signs that period is over and things are evening out. So that gap is decreasing. People are coming back, but they are coming back to sort of sometimes different jobs, and they are expecting greater compensation. And we see that especially in the increase in the food service wage. The thing, though, that is posing a big challenge is, of course, the inflation rate. The inflation rate is quite high, and a lot of wage gains, particularly for these low wage workers, are being eroded. And so there's sort of continuing disruption there and continuing sort of grumbling that people are not seeing the gains that they would like, particularly because of the inflation rate, which is showing no signs of turning back. And so what we are seeing then is this wage growth that we're seeing in this post-pandemic world where people are responding. We're seeing that it is really unevenly distributed between low wage and high wage people. And so we see that immediately after the pandemic, or sort of maybe in the death throes of the pandemic, it's hard to say exactly how to characterize it, but in August 2021, wage growth for lower wage workers was still quite high at 11.4%. We see now that wage growth has slowed dramatically in the most recent data available. And so that trend is sort of falling off, and the wage growth is being undercut quite significantly. Middle wage workers, they're in the middle, and they're not changing, and their wage growth isn't really changing between these two periods. But higher wage workers experienced wage growth after the pandemic, and they're experiencing more wage growth now. And so it's really quite an unequal distribution of who's benefiting from these sort of gains in the post-pandemic or immediate post-pandemic world. And so this idea that inflation is undercutting wages is particularly true for these low wage workers who are most likely going to be your agricultural workforce or your food service workforce, or even maybe your food manufacturing workforce would fall into this middle wage, but likely a lot of workers there in the lower wage as well. And so they're all experiencing these sort of compressed growth trajectories that are going to keep their eye on the search ads or the wanted ads and looking for different jobs with better wage potential. Do you want to click to the next slide? In terms of summer work, there's always high demand for summer work. So job postings are 40% higher than they are in February. But we also are seeing a lot of evidence, the evidence available to us, that domestic workers are not as interested in summer jobs as they have been in years past. Whether this is disaffected teens, they feel like they've missed a lot of their, prime years of life due to the pandemic, and so they're not interested in spending their summers working, or they're feeling like they're behind in school. We're seeing a lot of evidence, survey evidence of that as well. We're seeing a lot of signs that domestic workers in particular are not as interested in summer jobs. So the data that we have is how much people search for these jobs, and we're seeing those search rates fall pretty dramatically. And so this is not good news, of course, for those of you who maybe have farm stand sales and looking for cashiers for the summer, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of evidence that these people are not where they used to be. One spot of good news, at least not necessarily for on-farm work, or specifically not for on-farm work, but there were extra H-2B visas announced for the summer months. This is one of the bigger increases we've seen in these visa numbers. And we are seeing some evidence that international workers are responding to this. So if you click, we'll see a graph of the number of foreign job seekers looking for seasonal work. So you see, prior to, obviously during the pandemic, this demand was quite low, but we're seeing where we are now is a huge difference in the terms of the number of people searching for H-2B work coming from foreign places, particularly the Caribbean and Mexico are sort of standbys for H-2B workers. This number, the most recent number, is actually 600% higher than where it was prior to the pandemic, which is really quite dramatic. And so there is an indication that people are responding to these increased number of visas. So you want to click? Just a quick policy update as well. The inflation rate and the labor shortages have made, have gotten people's attention, particularly in Congress. And so renewed interest in the Farmworker Modernization Act, which will provide significant changes to the H-2A program in terms of on-farm work. Because of these issues that everyone is seeing kind of across the supply chain, but particularly on-farm, lawmakers have sort of gotten their acts together and really started to push again for trying to bolster bipartisan support for this act. And the plan, most recently stated plan, was that they want to introduce the bill for vote in the Senate before summer recess. It, of course, if you go ahead and click, yeah, so there is support from the leadership in the Senate, and it's passed the House already. And so this is, according to at least some sources, the closest we've ever been to sort of actual movement towards some sort of relief for farm labor shortages. We also know that the agricultural space, compared to any other, is more likely to have successful immigration legislation, just due to the importance of the agricultural sector in our country and the really dramatic needs for labor that have always been the case, but now are even more dramatic after the pandemic. Go ahead and click. Of course, the outstanding question, and this is probably where, if anything gets bogged down, this will be where it is if the particularly Republican Party demands that there are border security measures coupled with this bill, that might, throw a wrench in the works and sort of bog down this sort of negotiation for moving this bill forward. despite the fact, now it does seem to have strong bipartisan support, but you never know what's going to get added on later on. And so we'll keep an eye on that, particularly if it comes to vote before the summer recess, which would be surprising, but is not unheard of, certainly. So that is that. I apologize for the slides. I apologize, David, for making you have to be my slide advancer. I blame PowerPoint entirely. But if there are any questions, you can feel free to shoot me an email or call my office, and I'd be happy to talk. Thanks. I'm so sorry, David.
Fascinating statistics in there. And well, I have one question that I'll throw out at you.
Yeah, sure.
While we're here. So is in your mind, for the labor in the crop and the livestock industries that you were showing, is there going to have to be a significant increase in the dollars allocated by farm managers to those positions in order to pull them away from some of the other jobs to bring them back to the farm or keep them on the farm?
That would certainly be the easiest way. And it's hard to say because the budget is tight everywhere, as Barry has made it very clear. The budget is tight everywhere, and so if there is extra space to lure workers away with a higher wage, that's going to be the quickest way to do it. But there is a lot of evidence as well that there are other mechanisms to pull people in by learning how to leverage the unique aspects of working in an agricultural operation that people often don't think of. But the underlying fact is that it is an incredibly difficult job, and people are more than ever looking to be compensated more for any work that they do, but particularly those hard jobs. So it's I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that does seem to be the case.
That's why we let off with you and Barry both, right? So it can only go up from
Great.
here. We appreciate, Margaret, you being on with us and sharing.
Absolutely.
It looks like we're going to have to make this a regular feature just to talk about labor, because it's going to be part of that risk management that all producers have to do going
It's
forward.
not going away. I agree with you there. All right, well, we'll give it over to Peggy, and I hope I didn't steal her thunder with the farm worker modernization, but
no, you did not. No.
Oh, good. Thanks.
No, I've been keeping an eye on that, but I thought I'd wait a bit to see what happens over on the other side. But thank you, Margaret. It's so nice to have your expertise here at Ohio State. We really appreciate it. A little bit sad, though, to see Diane's expertise leaving us, and the last Farm Office Live with Diane this morning makes me a bit sad. She's been a wonderful colleague to work with, and we will surely miss her here on Farm Office team. So I have a few things I want to review. It's not been too active on the legislative side, both at the federal and state levels. A little bit of activity, but there's been, the spring recesses always slow things down a little bit. So some news, looking first at the federal level, you may have heard this, that Marcy Kapter has now been appointed to the House Agriculture Committee. Marcy Kapter is from Northwestern Ohio, up in the Toledo area. So we now have that Ohio presence on the House Ag Committee. That's always a good thing when we have Ohioans there on those committees. So she is now there. As far as what that committee is doing, they did have a busy day on the 17th here this week and reported out 6 different bills, some of them bipartisan, some of them not. The one that's receiving a lot of attention is the first one you see there, the Meatpacking Special Investigator Act, because even though that's a bipartisan bill, it is not supported on the Republican side as well as they would like to see that support coming, but that would appoint a special investigator to keep an eye on these competition issues that we've seen. And that person would be in the USDA Packers and Stockyards Division and would have greater authority, both criminal and civil prosecutorial authority, to enforce some of those competition issues that many claim are occurring there in that industry. But The Senate is also looking at the same bill, and it's just not going anywhere on the Senate side. So we may not see any further action on this one. And then we also have a supply chain issue that everyone is always talking about these days. And this would create a task force to look at some of the food system supply chains that we are, supply chain issues that we're seeing here, especially as a result of COVID. So that passed the committee. The Butcher Block Act is one that is focused on helping the meat processing sector and would provide a new loan program for new and expanding processors as well. I'm sure Margaret's watching this one, grant dollars for increasing that workforce and both hiring and training of that processing workforce. So that one might see some additional action here over on the Senate side. And then we have an additional $750 million appropriation bill for EQIP, especially for nutrient management practices coming out of that House Bill 7764. And then the last two that you see here are Republican-sponsored measures. And I think it's kind of interesting that they're very much into the acronyms right now. The Sustains Act and the Precise Act are two Republican measures that a team of Republican colleagues have put forth. And so the first would be to encourage some private partnerships in the area of agricultural sustainability and allowing those private investments in conservation practices in different parts of the country and allowing USDA to match the funds. And that's a pretty interesting concept that we're seeing gain a little bit of interest there in HR 2606. And then the last one, the Precise Act, would create yet another task force to look at, again, food system issues and resilience in that supply chain. So that one is the Republican version, looking at that issue of supply chain sustainability. So those are moving, as I said, on the House side, but they still have a ways to go over on the Senate side. When we look at the Senate Ag Committee, they have begun the Farm Bill hearings. That was the big news there, the end of April, with those Farm Bill hearings kicking off in Michigan. So that's moving in the House or the Senate Ag Committee. And then also just announced a hearing that will be coming up. So they're very much still in that hearing phase and not moving a lot of legislation on the Senate side of the Ag Committee, but they're holding a hearing on opportunities and challenges facing farmers, families, and rural communities. And that's received a lot of attention, that upcoming hearing on the 26th. So that's what we're seeing over on the Senate side. If we look at Ohio, as I said, we had a spring recess that slowed some things down after that flurry of bills that I told you about last month that we saw passed in the Ohio legislature. And right now we just have a few things going on. The slow moving vehicle bill that I have made some jokes about being the slowest moving bill did finally pass and it is now awaiting the governor's signature, and that would create some additional lighting and notification type materials on our animal drawn vehicles. So that one looks like it may finally see its end, as well as the auctioneer bill that I've told you about. That one has passed now, both on the House and Senate side. And then the other action that we saw recently was that poultry chick bill that I've told you about that would change how many poultry chicks, reduce that number of chicks sold in lots. That has passed the House and is now over in the Senate Ag and Natural Resources Committee. So not a lot going on down at the state legislature, but that gives me some time to tell you a little bit about how to use the Ohio legislature's website. This is one that you can go to if you don't want to hear me drone on about these bills. You can find them yourselves, and there's a lot of good information. Just in the time that I've been an attorney and practicing, this website has improved dramatically, and you can find just about anything that you need to know about a proposal on the Ohio legislature's website. So this is the site as you're looking at it, and you'll see that it's a pretty simple, straightforward site. We're going to go in to the search box that you see down here highlighted. And you can search either by a bill number, if you know it, or a keyword. So it's a very easy search mechanism. Just put that in and you put in something like beginning farmer, and you will get results like this. It'll give you a number of different proposals that include beginning farmer type language. And you can see that it gave us the one that we want to take a look at, the one that I told you about last week that passed House Bill 95. And so you can click on that there, that link, and it will take you to the page for that bill. And it will tell you who the primary sponsors are. You can find out who all of the sponsors are, but they always highlight those primary sponsors, give a quick little summary of the title of the bill, and then you'll see that across the top, a number of different menu options for checking in on the bill, its status, looking at the actual language, finding committee activity, all there on this bill page once you reach that point. So when we go in a little bit further, we can see that there are versions of the text that you can pull up in either web or PDF form. And you'll see the progression of the text over time from the point that it's introduced to what actually passed and is enrolled into the Ohio Revised Code and codified. You can also see this second section here is very useful because this will be the analysis that the Legislative Service Commission provides on that bill. So if you don't want to read and try to figure out what the bill is doing, you can go to the analysis. And then we also have the fiscal notes here. Sometimes those are very informative. Sometimes there's not much that you can find there, as well as the local impact statement and any other additional documents that might be in place. So when we look at the bill itself and the text that you can pull up, it's going to look something like this. And for those of you who aren't familiar with reading our legislative proposals in Ohio, I love how Ohio does this. Many states, it's much harder to see what they're proposing to change, but we underline any new language coming into the bill or into the statute and strike through anything that's being proposed to be removed from that statute. So, and then we also include the remaining language so you can comprehensively see what they're proposing to do with a statute. As you see here, the underlined and stricken language tells you what they want to change. So that's a very helpful way of presenting. As I said, some states make it much harder, and Congress makes it much harder to piece it all together. But if you don't want to look at that proposal, you can go over to the bill analysis page that I showed you, and you'll see here this summary and a detailed analysis prepared by those attorneys who work down at the Legislative Service Commission. So they break it down much in the same way that I break it down as I try to explain it. And they'll put it into a little bit more organized form and plain English for those of us who are trying to decipher what the bill is proposing. So that's on that analysis page. And then I told you that there is the fiscal note and local impact statement. And so you can see here that they will provide any information that they may have at the time that would relate to the fiscal impact of the proposal. So that information is available. And then also we can go to the committee activity, which I believe is next. My bar is hiding that part of my screen, but you can see here that it shows you where the bill is as far as, I think that's the status page actually. Let me hide this screen so I can, there we go. Yep, that's the status page that shows you where things are. It started down here, it was introduced in February, and you can see the progression as it moves through 21 into 22, going through the different committees, when it passed the House, when it passed the committees, reported out, and so on. And then finally, we get to July 18th, which is the effective date for the bill. So that's the status page. And then going now to the votes. on the bill. That's always good. If you want to see how your representative or a particular person voted, you can pull up the show breakdown. You can see how well supported it was or whether it was a little bit more controversial, less supported. That's on the votes tab. And then finally, now getting to the committee activity tab. This is one that I use a lot to pull up all of the committee documents. So you can see as it progressed through the different committees and who the witnesses were who testified for or against a proposal or just as an interested party. And you can pull up their actual testimony too to see what their position was. And here's an example of sponsor testimony as well as testimony from an interest group, OFA, on that particular bill. So those are always useful documents to review if you want to see where different organizations stand or individuals on that issue. So that's a quick run through. Hopefully that's helpful to all of you. And I will be happy now to turn over to my colleague, Robert Moore, for more information on long-term care.
Okay, thanks, Peggy. Okay, let's see, I think it was March, I did my first presentation on long-term care, and there mostly we talked about
Robert,
yes.
Right now we're seeing your kind of that next slide page rather than your whole screen.
Okay. How's that? Is that any better?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So in March, I talked about cost of long-term care and just described long-term care in general. And since that time, I've done some research on what are the actual statistics, how long do people need long-term care, and essentially what are the risk to farms in Ohio. So I still think long-term care is one of, if not the biggest risk to farms in Ohio and across the country. But the good thing is I don't think it's quite as severe as what I had originally thought. So I'll go through that analysis with you and then share some other comments about what we can do about that. So let's review this slide again. This slide I had up in my last presentation as well. And it talks about the cost of long-term care. And if you go kind of the bottom there, nursing home costs, those are always the biggest cost in Ohio, $90,000, $100,000 in that range. Ohio is slightly under the national average, which is good, but at $90,000 or $100,000, it's still plenty high. Another point here I wanted to make is when we talk about long-term care, there is different types of long-term care. I know before I kind of started looking into this, if I heard long-term care, I automatically thought nursing home cost. But that's not always the case. And many times long-term care can be provided outside of a nursing home. So some long-term care can be done in the home at a significantly lower cost, about 2/3 of what a nursing home would cost. So that's something to keep in mind as we kind of analyze what the real risk of long-term care is. So based on statistics from the Administration for Community Living, this is a federal government agency. Their statistics say that a 65-year-old person has a 67% chance of needing some type of long-term care services, and that women will need 3.7 years, men will need 2.2 years of care. So a 65-year-old person, 2/3 chance of needing care, and that care will likely average 2.2 to 3.7 years. The difference in the number, women live longer, so their care is going to be longer. Another thing I discovered in my research is I had heard these numbers before, this 2.2, but I'd always heard it as the average nursing home stay is 2.2 years. That's not correct, because this is the years of long-term care. Remember, some long-term care can be done in the home. So when I talked about, you know, as I do more research on this, I don't think the risk is maybe quite as severe. This is one of the reasons, because it's not 2.2 years in a nursing home, it's 2.2 years of total care. Then down here, this is what really we're all concerned with, is what if we need that long-term care? And about 20% of people will need more than 5 years of care. And obviously 5 years of care, much more risk involved than 2.2 years of care. So what kind of services are needed and how long do those services last? And again, this is from the same federal agency, Administration for Community Living, but based on their statistics, 69%, and this is slightly higher because this is all people of all ages. The 67% was for 65-year-olds and up, but essentially it's about the same number. But in this 3 years, this is the average of the 2.2 and the 3.7. So this would be for the average of men and women. So about 2/3 of people are going to need long-term care. On average, that care will last 3 years. But 1 year of that care will be unpaid care. This is care that's going to be provided by a spouse or family members. Okay. Then another year or so is going to be paid at home. And if we go back to that slide about cost, remember, at-home care is going to be about 2/3 of nursing home cost. Of these 3 years, on average, only 1 year is going to be spent in a nursing home, and that's that $90,000 to $100,000 cost. So this is one of the reasons that the risk isn't quite as great as I thought. It's still a big risk, but it's not as great as I thought, because some or much of the long-term care services that are needed can be done at home, some unpaid, and some at much less than a nursing home facility. So let's take a typical scenario based on those statistics. So if we take a 65-year-old farmer, we've got them 60%, 67% chance of needing long-term care. On average, that care is going to be 3 years. One of those years will probably be unpaid in-home, spouse or family members providing that care. Another year will be in-home services, and in Ohio, that average is around $60,000 a year. And then one year may be in a nursing home at around $90,000 a year. So if we take this 60,000 for 1 year, 90,000 another, we add those up, and there's a 67% chance that those will be needed. That's $100,000. Now, I'm not saying that's a scientifically accurate way to figure out what the average cost will be, but it gives us a rough idea. I think generally we can assume the average person is going to need around $100,000 of long-term care someplace in their life. So again, that's why I'm maybe not as concerned about long-term care, because on the average, many farms can absorb that cost. So how are the long-term care costs paid? How's this $100,000 or whatever it ends up being, how is it paid? Well, the first thing we need to keep in mind is income will be used to pay those long-term care. I've had clients in the past that would come in and say, I better give all my assets away before, I have to go in a nursing home and I lose them all to the nursing home. And I'll say, well, how much income do you think you're going to have, in retirement? And they'll say $150,000. I'll be like, what are you worried about? Your income will pay your long-term care cost. So many people maybe don't recognize that your income can pay for some or all of your long-term care. If income is insufficient to cover long-term care costs, most people then will go into their savings, financial resources, investments, whatever you want to call it. That's usually what's used up next. So then if income and savings together are insufficient, my experience is farmers will then start selling operating assets, grain, livestock, crops, then machinery and equipment. The farmland only is at risk if income is insufficient, savings have been used up, and all the non-real estate farm assets have been used up. It's only then that the real estate must be used to pay for long-term care. So many farms have enough income and or savings to cover the average long-term cost of, let's assume that's $100,000. I think if you said to most farmers, hey, I'll guarantee you that you'll have $100,000 of long-term care, but not a dollar more, I think many would sign up for that because most farms can absorb that. Most farms can also absorb, cover cost above the average. If you look at USDA statistics, the average farm in the United States has about 40,000 of equity in non-real estate farm assets, crops, livestock, machinery, about $240,000. So if farmers had to, on average, they could come up with $240,000 more before their land is at risk. What farmers are really worried about, and what I'm worried about as I work with farmers, is the outlier scenario. We've got the average covered in a lot of cases, but we all know somebody who's been in a nursing home for 10 years. It's that outlier scenario that puts farms at jeopardy. It's that outlier scenario that causes the farm not to transfer to the next generation. So that's why, I kind of started out saying, yeah, maybe as I've done some research, I'm not as concerned about long-term care as maybe I began with, because the average, I think, is more, most farmers have the ability to deal with that average. But this outlier is still a big, big risk to many farms in Ohio and across the country. So whose farm assets are most at risk? So again, if somebody has a relatively high income, if their income's 100,000 or more, I'm talking a single person here, their assets probably have a low risk for long-term care costs because they've probably got the income to pay for the care. The people who are at high risk have the low income and the low savings. And this is a really important analysis to start with. I want to emphasize again, I've had people over the years come in and say, I better give all my assets away before the nursing home takes them. But then as we analyze their income and their balance sheet, their assets are not at a high risk because they've got enough income and savings to cover all but the most extreme outlier scenarios. So let's take just a couple examples I thought of. We've got a single person here, make $100,000 a year. They've got $250,000 of savings in the bank. The average scenario, again, if we assume that's $100,000, no risk to farm assets because they can cover it almost with income, and they've got plenty of savings to cover it. Even an outlier scenario, say if they go into a nursing home for $100,000 a year, there's $20,000 short, but this savings will cover 12 and a half years of nursing home cost. And the odds of being in a nursing home for longer, that very rare. So if this person came in to see me, my advice would them to be, unless you want to be 100% absolutely sure no farm assets are at risk, then yeah, maybe you need to gift some assets away. But 99% of the time, I'm going to tell them, you're good. You're covered on long-term care. You don't have to have aggressive plan in place. Let's look at kind of middle of the road. Here we've got a married couple, same income. So, but the problem is now the at-home spouse needs $50,000 to live. That only leaves $30,000 for the nursing home. So now we've got a $70,000 deficit here to cover costs on an annual basis. $70,000 out of the $250,000 savings will only cover 3.5 years. So if I was talking to them, I'd say, okay, on average, you're only going to need, between the two of you, 2 years of nursing home care and 2 years of, in-home care. You're probably covered. The income and your savings will probably cover you. And even if you are above average a bit, you've still got $500,000 here you can sell before your land is at risk. So I would describe them, the average scenario, low risk, because their income and savings are going to cover the average scenario. The outlier scenario, again, being in a nursing home for a long time, yeah, their operating assets definitely at risk, less risk to the land. This is the client where I might say, okay, here's the benefits of planning. Here's the disadvantage. You're kind of right in the middle. Which way do you want to go here? Then example 3, this is the person that needs to be very concerned about long-term care. A lot of widows and widowers in the state that own maybe a couple hundred acres of land, get a little bit of Social Security income. Primary income is from the land, $40,000 of income, have a little bit of savings. Even the average scenario, their farm is likely being sold. And if they're in the nursing home for more than a few months, farm assets will be sold. So this is the person who should be very concerned about long-term care. This is the person that if they incur long-term care, the farm is likely not going to make it to the next generation, at least a part of the farm. Real quick on Medicaid, what role does it play? Medicaid does pay for long-term care when you can't pay it for yourself. The problem is you can own almost no assets to qualify. So that example I just showed you, that person, if she owned or he owned 200 acres, until that acreage is all sold and they own only $2,000, they don't qualify for Medicaid. So unless you give all your assets away and then you got to wait 5 years, Medicaid does very little, will be very little help for farmers. So I just wanted to point that out. Medicaid is not a solution for many farmers without very aggressive planning, which means essentially giving all your assets away. So in summary, long-term care risk may be a bit less than expected, but it's still can be a significant cost, is a significant risk to Ohio farms. Most farms can withstand the average, but it's when we get to that outlier that is the real problem for many farms. And we need to, as we work with farmers, we need to first assess the risk to them. And that depends on what's their income capability, what savings do they have. And once we know that, then we're able to give them some advice on what's the best strategy for them. At our next Farm Office Live webcast, I'll go into what strategies are available. For a bit of a preview, none of them are easy and none of them are without significant disadvantages, but there are some things we can do to help limit the risk to Ohio farms. All right, that's it
Great.
for me.
Thanks, Robert. I'm going to do a real quick federal farm program update. There's only a few slides here to show before we get to some of Diane's closing thoughts. Just want to make sure the people are aware that some programs have opened up on the federal side for people to enroll in. First, the Clear 30. We've talked about all these programs in the past. The Clear 30, the Clean Lakes, Estuaries, and Rivers Initiative, which originally was rolled out for the Chesapeake Bay and the Great Lakes. But of course now, last year that was rolled out nationwide. Just know that applications are open through the end of, actually to August 5th. And it includes a significant increase to those annual CRP payments, those continuous payments plus 20% water quality and a nice annual rental rate adjustment. Know that we have some CRP ground in different ways, might be coming out up until September. So if you have some CRP ground that is coming out up until September, you are actually eligible for this program. So something that producers might want to check into is the Clear 30 for that 30-year program. And then we've talked about this in the past as well as Organic and Transitional Education Certification Program, the OTECP. And a reminder that there was 3 years of payment that helps pay for application fees, certification expenses, inspections, soil testing for micronutrients, postage, state fees. All those are part of this OTECP program. Just a reminder that the last year of this program, which is the 2022 program year, covers expenses from October 1st of this past year through September 30th this year. Just understand that sign up began this week and will go through the end of October. So if you're an organic producer or you're a producer who is transitioning into organic, there's different payment levels for both of those programs, for organic versus the transitioning to organic. But know that you can check in with the Farm Service Agency office to enroll in those programs. And tied into that is the OCCSP. We've got to keep all the acronyms rolling, right? Organic Certification Cost Share Program. That helps cost share assistance for producers that are obtaining or renewing their certification under what would be considered a national organic program. And that can help pay for those certification costs. Know here in Ohio, of course, our friends at OFA, Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, is a national organic program, as well as Global Organic Alliance incorporated to the programs here. So our producers here in Ohio should be able to participate if they're organic in this program, cost share program as well. And just a reminder, I mentioned this last time, Pandemic Cover Crop Program, the PCCP, that deadline was extended for any of those cover crops planted after March 15th. That program is going to be ending here in 11 days to sign up. So we'll make sure you are checking into that as well. Where you can find out more details is right there on the slides. And then some recent articles that we have on the Farm Service Agency programs. Proud of my colleagues. And we are gotten some articles up on the Ohio Ag Manager website, specifically with some of the programs the Farm Service Agency offers. The newest one that was posted this morning was about commodity storage. And of course, here on Farm Office Live, we've talked about the Farm Storage Facility Loan Program. Understand, if you want to learn more about that, looking to put some more storage up, whether that be a grain bin to hay storage to something in the urban agriculture area for cold crops. You can check into that program, as well as we've talked about the loan programs for socially disadvantaged farmers, loan programs available for beginning farmers, as well as a really neat program, the Transition Incentives Program, which is targeted to help put some of those CRP expiring contracts, pulling them out and helping a beginning, veteran, or socially disadvantaged farmers. So those articles all have been posted on the Ohio Ag Manager website, which you can see that down there at the bottom of the screen since the last time that we held the Farm Office Live program. You can keep checking back there. for some more of those articles as well. And just a reminder about the non-insurance crop disaster assistance program, better known as NAP, for some producers that are out there. Some of your crops might not be insurable, commercial crops, but the NAP program does provide financial assistance for those that are not insurable. So this could be from some of your fiber crops to specialty crops like hemp, Christmas trees, nursery, forage crops. All those can be eligible for NAP coverage, and you can check in with the FSA USDA office as far as talking about some of those different programs for the NAP programs and how to sign up. Just a reminder, that's time of year to be thinking about some of those sign up for NAPs. So there, Diane, I breezed through that because your words of wisdom, I got the preview. We all got the preview of your words of wisdom. And I think this is going to be a special time for everybody who's on today's program. I know that all of us here we're kind of getting sentimental because we're sad. We're sad that someone like Diane is leaving Extension, retiring, but well-deserved. A wonderful 36-year career for OSU Extension. And I know you are going to do some great things with your grandson and at the farm and some private things that you're going to dabble in. But we wanted to make sure we left the closing thoughts, the last lecture for you here today. So Diane, I'm going to bounce it over to you.
All right, thanks, David. And appreciate the opportunity to just share a few thoughts. And really, when I got to thinking about it, we are so blessed in Ohio for the type of an agriculture industry we have. I started out as an ag agent in Columbiana and Mahoning counties, and it's like a little microcosm. We had row crops, livestock, poultry, dairy, potatoes, strawberries, tree fruits, just a huge complement of different types of enterprises. And we see that across the state. There's a lot of rural agricultural enterprises, but we also now have some urban enterprises as well. And what's really encouraging to me is we continue to have, even though we've seen shifts, we continue to have a variety of sizes and tenures within the industry. We have beginning farms. We have multi-generational, more than 100 years in operation farms. But there's smaller ones, there's larger ones. And one of our challenges is that we have the urban areas like some other states don't. So, and many times we find ourselves in competition with those urban areas for land and people. Margaret was talking about the challenges for ag labor that we're experiencing, but those are also advantages in that we have a lot of customers that are close at hand. We have some potential labor sources in those areas, but there's opportunities there as well. And one of them that I've seen that has really been a blessing to many farms through the years is there are jobs there. There are non-farm jobs there. So when we hit those times, low prices, particular individual farms might be struggling. There are opportunities for some decent temporary off-farm jobs or jobs that can help families get started. And so those opportunities can buffer some of the adverse impacts we do see in agriculture. But this really is something that always excites me as I dig through the numbers in agriculture, whether it's dairy, which this happens to be, and I can show you the same thing with crop farms, is that there are opportunities to do really well in agriculture. And as I talk particularly to new farmers or farmers that are thinking about doing a new enterprise, I think the really big message that we need to tell is that if you're just going to be average, don't bother. If you want to be successful and really enjoy what you're doing in agriculture, shoot for that top third. You don't want to be average. This just looking at cows, this number, these net return per cow numbers, the average of all herds, and the high 20%. These are the 5-year averages from our Ohio Farm Business Analysis Summary. So the average for all herds was just under $300 over 5 years. And granted, this last 5 years has been one of the worst stretches we've seen in the industry. But in spite of that low price situation, that high 20% was averaging almost $1,000. And just the impact that has at the farm level is tremendous. 36 years ago, if we had 70 cows, that was a big farm. Now those same farms that would support a family or a couple families are going to be most likely somewhere between 350 to 700 cows. And with average performance, that leaves that business less than $100,000 of net farm income to pay principal, pay the families, et cetera. But in that high 20% category, and I think we can stretch this down to the high third, we have over $200,000 more milking the same number of cows, doing the same amount of work to be able to return a good living to those families and put them in a position where they can move that business forward when the opportunities are there. So I wanted to look at just a few things. I'm going to take this from a perspective of the farm business analysis piece, which is what I've worked in the most over these 36 years. And just a few things that I continually see, and this is not size specific. This is not just farms that aren't in the 20%. It's really all farms need to consider these things. But in the record keeping, to have good numbers to use to manage the farm business, we need to have good numbers to use, because if we're not using solid numbers, we're not going to be able to make truthful and valid decisions to push that business forward. So just some of the really basic things about what do you want a bookkeeping system to do? What do you need to know to manage that farm business? And then making the plan to get that done. Another huge shift that I've seen that happened in the first 10 years was the shift from production management as a priority to business management, getting things done through people. And so getting input from those people is really important, and talking with that team about what we need to know. Bookkeeping is not just for doing income taxes anymore. We need to get more, we need to do taxes and do them well, but we need to get more out of that effort than just completing an income tax return. So these are kind of in tandem here. When we started doing management Excel training, the real driver was we now have to get things done through other people, and staffing those positions that are needed are really important. And staffing the position that will collect, assemble, work with these numbers is really important. So getting the person to do the bookkeeping and those types of managerial things, that enjoys it, that is knowledgeable and skilled and will do it well, is important. And letting them help select what the tool is that will be used. One time I came to a farm and we were trying to put together collect their numbers. And the farmer said, "Oh, you know what? I went to this conference and I bought this big bookkeeping package and didn't talk to anybody about it ahead of time. And do you think you can show my people how to use this? Because I really don't want to spend another $1,000 sending them to training." So there's a whole complement of things that need to happen. We need to select a good package. We need to have people that will do a good job with this and that know how to use it. We need to do these things in a timely manner. Just doing them at the end of the year for taxes isn't going to benefit your business. It is a real job. It's as important, if not more important, than being out on the tractor working ground. Entering net check amounts, that I see that over and over again. We need to enter the gross amount of a transaction and then take the deductions, so those costs are allocated appropriately throughout the bookkeeping system. That's one of the keys to getting good, truthful numbers. But when we do the bookkeeping and record keeping, we need to review it and revise it regularly. There's always error checking that needs to happen. An example that just happened this winter was going through an income statement with a farmer. And as we looked at the transactions, inadvertently some of the fertilizer got into the spray categories. So if that hadn't been caught, our overall cost of production would have been correct, but as we're looking at some of those finer details, we wouldn't have had correct costs in terms of historic costs for fertility and for spray decisions. And bottom line for any business, these we have to be separating business and personal types of transactions, should be completely separate bookkeeping systems. That way we're evaluating the business, and it also allows the personal to the family to make better control, keep better control of those family living expenses. And, you know, I start my career in the dairy industry and DHI records. This was a classic. You get those monthly management records and you go to a farm and there's this whole stack of envelopes from each month that has never been opened. So some farms do work with accountants, and that is fine, and it's a good thing, especially when they know they don't have someone that will do the kind of work that needs to be done. But those reports from the accountant are really important. Those need to be opened up, double checked. Is everything in the right place? And what can those records tell you, and what kind of decisions can those inform for the business? Another important document that every farm from the beginning of that farm business, continually throughout the life cycle of that business, needs balance sheets, and they need good balance sheets. So creating them to begin with is really important. And I would like to see farms doing this, and that it's not the lender's job to help a farm do their balance sheet. They can certainly help them make it better, but the farm should be bringing that document to the lender. It should include detail. It should tell a lot about the business. And I kind of balance that out with the balance sheets that LLCs have to do as a requirement annually are very different than the type of balance sheet a farm should be doing to really manage and control and know what's going on in their business. Typical LLC balance sheets list a few assets and then accumulated depreciation and the liabilities, lump sums. You can't look at those typically and get a feeling for the business. It won't even tell you, if it's a dairy farm, how many cows there are. So the farm should also be doing a very detailed balance sheet that can give them a good picture of what's going on, but also others who might be involved in the management of that business. So capturing all of the assets and liabilities that are pertinent to the business. They need to be updated at least annually, if not more often. And when those are updated, you know, you've got a lot of work invested in those documents. Start with a copy and what's changed. They don't have to start from scratch. Separating the personal and business here is also really important. And to have a good document where you can see, is the business generating increases in net worth, which is what we want to see bottom line. It's really important to not be changing asset values unless there's a really good reason. So in our analysis program, we have a cost basis on those non-current assets, and we also have the market valuation. That helps considerably. But with things like breeding livestock and land in particular, we don't want to be changing those values each year, because we don't want changes in the net worth reflecting just, oh, land's going for more, so I'm going to increase the land value, and it can show me a really nice increase in net worth, but it doesn't reflect the performance of the business. So occasional adjustments in valuation of those assets can be done. It should be done with a note. And in that year of the change, actually what we do when we do analysis is we do an amended beginning balance sheet and increase that valuation of that asset, so it's reflected on both the beginning and the ending balance sheets. So any changes in net worth are a result of what kind of decisions the business management made. And a good balance sheet gives you tremendous amount of ability to monitor trends. current assets, liquidity and solvency of the business. Very important. Whether you use a formal business analysis program or you're doing that yourself, it's critical to make the time to, at the end of the year or even regularly throughout the year, do some business evaluation. The first step is the overall business. And when I say overall, consolidating entities is, I think, an important point, as we have more farms that have multiple entities. Sometimes it's multiple LLCs. It might be a combination of operating LLCs and sole proprietor, mom and dad own the land. There's an operating LLC. There might be multiple LLCs for various reasons. Sometimes it's liability protection. Sometimes it's an ability to pass on along pieces to transfer some of the farm business. But when we look at how is the overall business performing, we want to consolidate those entities and look at the whole business. Sometimes we can, problems can be hidden in transactions between those entities, potential profitability issues. And if we put it all together, we can discover some of those issues early and have an opportunity to turn things around before we might notice otherwise. In that same vein, these should be accrual adjusted analyses. So we're pulling all the income and expenses into the business year, regardless of when they were incurred or when they were paid, et cetera. And accuracy checks are really important. I know a number of farms might have developed some spreadsheets that they're using to do some analysis work, making sure there is an overall accounting of all the cash that enters the business, all the cash that leaves the business. So it's not getting lost. We can make balance sheets, we can make income statements, but we need to do the cross check between those to make sure we've actually accounted for all of the cash in and out of the business, and that all the liabilities are accounted for, and inventories as well, beginning, ending inventories, production, et cetera. So accuracy checks are really important. We can generate a lot of numbers that may not be accurate, and then we don't have good tools to use to evaluate the business and make additional decisions. Then the next question that we should be answering is what enterprises are consistently generating profits. And with that consistency underlines the need for doing annual at least reviews. 1 year's information is good and it's interesting, but what are our trends? Each year is impacted by different environmental conditions and operating conditions. We're seeing great expense issues this year, some of which may be offset by income, but what is consistently generating profits, which aren't, and then using those numbers to dig into the why not, and combining that with the production side, because numbers do not stand by themselves. They're one of the tools for good farm management. So overall, I think it's really important that our farms are monitoring trends, developing and maintaining good numbers to monitor those trends, setting goals of where they want to see some of those farm financial standards. For instance, current ratio here, you can see for this farm, when our current ratio, we'd like to see it above 2 to 2.5. There's some real issues here for this farm. And they knew it was happening. They could even see a downward trend. So they had to make some serious decisions about how they could manage their business to build more liquidity into the business. And over time, that's happened. And now, how do they keep it that way? But being able to see trends, monitor those trends, set the goals, how do we achieve those goals, and then continually be monitoring progress. As I was thinking through the last 36 years and kind of what I have in my mind when I review farms analyses, this really popped to mind. If it looks or sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I've seen that in the ostrich era early in my career, ostriches, emus, worms, hemp is going to save farms. There's always kind of a scheme. And when it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And when the farm has the numbers, they can push those and see what it would mean for their farm. And there's opportunities to help push numbers. So I can't sign off without pushing the Farm Business Analysis Program one more time. I am pleased that it will be continuing with new management. Oh, David, you got to give me back one more slide. Oh, now I'm going to have to share again. Nope. I need to share one more slide. So the one more slide I wanted to share. This is not a sunset. This is actually a sunrise. What I'm really excited about is you have a tremendous team here with the farm office team, with the educators, with other specialists we have. And I'm really pleased that we are starting, it's actually open. A farm management field specialist position posting is open. We're hoping to fill 2 of those and also have a program manager position opening for the Farm Business Analysis Program. So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening. We are interviewing for a director of the Farm Financial Management and Policy Institute. So lots of good things happening. And I'm excited to see what everybody continues to do. So now you can switch out, David.
You snuck a slide in there, so
I did.
that's where you snuck a slide, so they have it there for you. So Diane, I think on behalf of the whole team, we just appreciate everything that you've done for OSU Extension farmers across Ohio, but your work is not done because you have 41 days, I believe, left. So we're gonna keep utilizing you for those 41 days, clear up till the ending bell ding. So, but thank you for those comments. I know you're going to be sharing more of those kind of comments with our extension educators before you leave too. So we do appreciate that. Speaking of comments, you can see up there the Qualtrics for the survey. Today's evaluation is not only about today's Farm Office Live, but those that we've conducted here in 2022. So we would encourage you to get on to the evaluation and fill that out, and we'll be sending that to your email box as well. And just we'd like to thank you for being here today with us on this webinar. We hope that the sky is clear and guys will be back out into their fields here across Ohio this week, and so we can make a good hard push here at the end of May. But just a reminder, our next webinar is going to be September 22nd. That's going to be live from the Farm Science Review, and maybe Diane, you'll want to just come and visit with us and hang out in the information booth for OSU Extension there. But we will be live from the Farm Science Review at 10 o'clock on September 22nd. So we hope to see you there. If there's anything breaking that happens between now and then, we will be back on in a special edition. But until then, we will take your questions anytime that you have. So any other closing thoughts from folks on our team?
Just to offer my congratulations to Diane and mention real quick that when I first started an extension in the fall of '91, Diane was the only female ag extension educator in the state of Ohio. So in many ways, she was also a pioneer. So thanks, Diane. Now I'm thinking about fully half of the A&R educators perhaps are women today. And
Yeah.
you led the way. So it's been a great honor to be a colleague all these years, Diane.
Oh, thanks, guys. Really enjoyed working with y'all. We